Welcome back. Hope you had a nice cup of coffee or tea or whatever. And it's my pleasure now to introduce to you Minna Houtilainen, who shares her time between Helsinki University and Uppsala University. And we just talked about it, and I am from Uppsala originally myself. And Minna said, well, Uppsala, it's like living in a child novel, in a children's novel. Minna is going to talk about what electromagnetic brain responses reveal of fetal and neonatal auditory exposure and learning. And Minna is a part of a research group in Helsinki called Brain and Music. So Minna has studied how music can relate and affect emotional modes in human beings. So Minna knows very much about music, and she can probably give you more scientific arguments than anybody else that music is good for you. And it is throughout life, both childhood and grown-ups. Minna, please.
Okay, thank you. It's wonderful to be here to talk a little bit neuroscience to you. Today we are focusing on the smallest brains, the fetuses and the newborns. I do research also on toddlers and adolescents and also on adults, and most of my music studies are in toddlers and adolescents. But let's today talk about the very smallest ones. I hope that after my talk you think more of noise, not only from the point of view of the noise level, but also of the content. What is there in the noise? Because for the auditory system, it makes all the difference. Of course, we know that the sound level makes all the difference too, but also what is inside, what is the content of the noise. I'm going to talk a little bit first about what these electromagnetic brain responses are and how you can measure them. And then I will show you a little bit proof about the infant auditory system being inclined towards learning from sounds. So all the sounds are received for a reason, and this reason is to learn something from them. And then I will show you a little bit evidence of this type of learning that occurs already even before the baby is born. Why this learning occurs so early, we can only speculate, and I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to present two studies that I'm running currently. One is is a study at the neonatal intensive care units, and this will be presented in much more detail by Ulrika Oden right after me. And then another study about working mothers, very much resembling what the first talk today was about. And then finally I'm going to say a few words about so-called optimal sound environment for infants, whatever that could be. But let's start with the electromagnetic methods. The most common method, and this is actually the oldest brain research method invented already in the 20s in Germany, is to record the electroencephalogram of the baby or a child or anybody, and then play some sounds and look at how the electroencephalogram changes because of the sounds. And if you do that really precisely, you will be able to record electric brain potentials, event-related brain potentials that are actually tied directly to the sounds. So these are like the picture of how the sound was analyzed in the brain. It was perceived, maybe it was memorized, maybe it evokes some attentional processes in the brain. All of this you can see in the event-related potentials. This method is nice because the baby is happy. He can just sleep throughout the measurement and doesn't have to care for the sounds what we are playing to them. There are many different types of devices, but the main idea is the recording of the electric potentials from the surface of the baby's brain. This you cannot do in fetuses because you cannot place the electrodes on the surface of the fetus's head. But we have another method, magnetoencephalogram. Here again we are recording the electromagnetic activity of the brain, but now we are not recording the potentials from the surface of the brain, but actually we are recording magnetic fields that are coming out from the brain. So all of us actually have magnetic fields coming out from our brains right now, and these magnetic fields can be recorded with MEG. These devices are a little bit clumsy. They look like old-fashioned hair dryers, and you put this helmet on top of the person's head and you are able to record a magnetic field from all over the brain. Well, this is not the case in babies, because when you put the baby's head in the MEG device, the helmet is too big. So you can only record from one auditory cortex at a time. The baby is lying on his side and you can record the auditory cortex that is downwards here. But anyway, even that is very exciting. Another exciting thing is that we can also record the magnetic fields coming from the fetus's brain. So when the fetus's brain is active, the magnetic field that is coming out from his head is also penetrating out from the mother's body. And if we take the device very close to the fetus's head, we can actually record that magnetic field. And we can see very similar brain responses from the fetuses. As you can see, the fetal head is very, very close to the sensors in the last trimester of the pregnancy. So we can make very similar recordings from the fetus, what we are doing from the newborns in the MEG. This is the device that we have in Helsinki. It is a flat bottom instrument with 99 channels. If you want to ride the Rolls-Royce of fetal MEG, you have to go to Little Rock, Arkansas, where they have this motorbike looking device which is specifically dedicated to fetal MEG and MKG studies, where they have the channels all over the mother's abdomen. So this is much more precise than the device that we have in Helsinki, but even with this device we can record brain responses when the fetus is hearing some sounds. Okay, what we are recording. These are data from 1990 from some of the very earliest studies recorded with ERPs in babies, showing that the auditory system is actually actively learning from the auditory environment. So these are brain responses recorded to some changes in the auditory environment. You are repeating a certain sound and the auditory system makes a model of that sound. This happens automatically. And then you can test if the model was actually done by presenting another kind of sound. If this other type of sound will elicit different types of responses, then you know that the model actually was created. The fetal or the neonatal auditory system was able to create a model of the repetition, and the model also was accurate enough to spot the difference between these two sounds. So these are the first recordings of this kind of response, which we call mismatch negativity, in newborn babies with EEG, and also the first paper from the same paradigm recorded with MEG. This came out in 2005. Okay, this was a very simple model, just repeating one sound. But we can test the neonatal auditory system with much more complicated sounds. For example, in this study, we wanted to know if the neonatal auditory system, making a model of a set of sounds, is disturbed by sounds that are completely different. Because we know that our adult auditory system is not disturbed. For example, you have some humming coming from the projectors or something like this, and it doesn't disturb your listening to my voice because they come from different directions, they are completely different types of sounds. So your brain can automatically segregate them into two different streams, and you can choose which one you are listening to. I hope you choose to listen to me and not the humming. Anyway, this is very automatic. And frequency separation is one good feature to separate sounds into different sound streams, and this is what we did here. These are the sounds where you are supposed to make a model of. And these are the sounds that are supposed to be segregated to a very different stream. So these sounds are low frequency sounds, and the ones that you're supposed to model are high frequency sounds. And what happens is that both the adult auditory system, but also the newborn auditory system, automatically segregates these sound streams. So this method of processing the auditory information is there already in the healthy newborn infants. By the way, if you get rid of the segregation so that you just play all the sounds around the same frequency areas, you can see that the response disappears both from adults and also from the babies. So this is a very important skill for the auditory system, to be able to segregate sound streams, sounds coming from different directions or different frequency levels, into separate streams. If the baby didn't have this, for example, the speech perception system would be mixing together with the humming of the refrigerator or something like that, and it would be very difficult to learn anything from that kind of a mess. So this is a very important skill that has been revealed by the neuroscience studies. It's very difficult to show this kind of skill in behavior, but you can see it in the brain responses. Also, we have been looking at learning from co-occurrences. This means that you have an auditory event which is always followed by another auditory event. For example, if you have a door at home which makes a little kind of a squeak when you close it, and then the clock says in the end. So every time you hear the squeak, you can already expect that, okay, it's going to be this sound soon, because they always go together. This is very, very automatic in the adult brain. We always have this detection of co-occurrences, and we learn to bind sounds together, even if there is a silent pause between the sounds. But if they always occur together, we kind of make a complete model of those. This is also a way to learn language. If you think about words, they have syllables that always occur together. When you speak to the baby, you might quite often say mum, ma. You know, these two syllables come after each other, and this could be made into a complete package in the auditory system of the baby. We tested the capability of this system in newborn infants. We created a language that doesn't exist, but this language, this pseudo-language, has 10 words, and all of those words consist of 3 syllables. When the first syllable of a word comes, if you know the language, you are actually going to know what is going to be the next syllable and also the next one after that. Because this is a language that only has these 10 words, so there's always going to be the same order of syllables. But after the last syllable of the word, well, you have no idea what's going to come next, because it can be any one of the words of the language. But again, after you have heard the first syllable, if you know the language, you are going to know the next ones too. So the second and the third syllable are predictable. The first syllable is not predictable. In normal language, of course, we have a lot of other cues, not only the co-occurrences. We have the prosodic cues, we have the stress on the first syllable, at least in Finnish language, and so on. So you have a lot of ways to learn the words. But in this experiment, the only cue to learn the words was actually the co-occurrence of the syllables. Can you guess how long it takes for the neonate to learn a language like this, just by listening to the co-occurrence of the syllables? There is no other cues. Can anybody guess? Just make a wild guess. I can tell you that our guess was that it might take something like 2 hours. So we played the sounds for 2 hours. And then when we went back to the data and tried to find out when the learning had occurred, we found out that it had occurred around something like 2 or 3 minutes. So they were actually very, very fast in learning the co-occurrences. They learned a new language in 2 or 3 minutes just by listening to these syllables. So this shows how fast and efficient the newborn auditory system is for learning from co-occurrences of sounds. Also, when we look at, we are all the time trying to go towards more natural sounds in the neuroscientific experiments. We would like to get rid of these isolated words and isolated syllables. And in this experiment, we actually used continuous natural speech and singing. And what we found out was that for the neonatal auditory system, it is actually very easy to find the beginning syllables of words from natural speech, and also from singing. Especially singing seems to give very large responses in the MEG system from the neonatal brain. We also tried to make some degraded speech so that we got rid of the changes in the F0 so that the speech sounds something like this. So you don't have any alteration of the F0, or also to get rid of the formats so that the speech sounds something like this. And both of these degraded versions give smaller responses. So it seems that the full spectrum of speech, the full variation of speech, is what gives rise to these large responses from the babies. Well, why are we so much interested in recording these event-related potentials or magnetic fields? Well, of course, the main reason is that they have some meaning. We can look at the skills of the baby already at that moment when we are making the recordings, or then we can also correlate it to later learning. There are many important studies in this field looking at early brain responses and relating them to later behavior or auditory or language-related problems. I just brought some examples here. These are from the PhD thesis of Vesa Putkinen. You can find this from the University of Helsinki webpage if you are interested in his work. He has been looking at how much children are involved with music, if they go to musical play school, if their parents have the habit of singing an evening song to them, or if they sing a lot themselves and so on. And he looks at how they are correlating to the brain responses that are recorded to speech-relevant changes in this paradigm. And as you can see, there are quite strong correlations that show that the exposure to music, the interest in music, and the music in the everyday life of the child actually make these brain responses grow faster. Not only speech-relevant brain responses, but also responses that are recorded to surprising sounds. This is work that is related to the allocation of attention. So we are also very much interested in how individual sounds are disturbing children when they are doing something that they are interested in, and what are the brain responses related to those switches of attention that occur in these situations. So this is just to convince you that it is important also to make these recordings of the brain responses. So the capacity to perceive sound features and to make models of ongoing sound environment as well as to learn from it is the most important capacity of the neonatal auditory system. If everything just sounds random, so there is nothing to learn, there is nothing to perceive, everything is just like a complete mess. And the first task for the neonate is to make sense of the auditory system, to make sense of the auditory environment. What is relevant? What is important? What is even maybe potentially dangerous or aversive? And what is something wonderful and will bring soon something very nice to the life of the neonate? They are very, very good at learning this. Okay, but this was now about the neonates, but then I also want to show something about our fetal studies. These are work by Eino Partanen from his PhD thesis, and you can also find this from the University of Helsinki webpage. And what we did in these two studies were that we were exposing pregnant women to speech and music so that we can actually control what the fetuses have heard. So every day, starting from pregnancy week 29, these mothers were listening to a tape that contained some 3-syllable pseudo words. You may guess already now that I like these pseudo words very much. And then also a piece of music. Many of the mothers told us that it was a very nice moment to listen to this tape because, you know, they took a cup of tea and they sat in the armchair and they had their other children around them and they were listening to this funny tape and also listening to the music on the tape. After the babies were born, we told the mothers, don't play the tape. Just quickly bring the baby for us for the neuroscience experiment. And that's what many of them did. Finnish mothers are great at this. And we recorded the brain responses to the same sounds that the babies had heard before they were born. And also we made small alterations to the sounds because we wanted to know if they are more capable of making a model of the sound environment if the sound environment has already been learned during the fetal period. And this actually was true. So it was true for the pseudo words and it was also true for the melodies. So for example here we are showing brain responses for very small changes in the melody that they had heard during the fetal period. So these changes are as small as 1 semitone. So that's something like 4% in frequency. And still they were able to notice these changes. If you hadn't heard the melody before, there would be no way for you to know that it's not the same as before. And the same holds true also for speech-related features, especially for the changes of pitch in the syllables that we were introducing in the experiment. So these studies show that during the fetal period already, the auditory system is trying to make models, is trying to learn from the auditory environment, from what is heard often, almost every day, many times a day maybe. So these are the things that there is capacity to learn. What is important for the auditory system to learn, if you think about it from that point of view? Of course, variations in pitch and intensity, sometimes also in some languages in duration, are very important, and these are of course markers of prosody, so they are helpful for the auditory system later to make sense of speech. Stressed and non-stressed syllables, this is a very common thing. It gives a rhythmic variation to the speech and it's very much related to the native language of the mother. And then word and syllable stress, and then of course phonemes, which are formed with specific acoustic features. If we think about music, music will be actually quite helpful for this type of learning. First of all, it's very interesting, so it is attracting the attention towards the sounds. There is a lot of repetition, especially in children's songs. There are many prosodic similarities with music and speech. But there are also some things in music that make it easier to perceive than speech. So you could actually say that singing to a child, it's like making speech easier to understand. The phoneme map is one construction in the brain that we are studying quite heavily. This means that the auditory system has to have a model of those phonemes that exist in the native language. There are ways to test whether this phoneme map has already been constructed. It should be constructed somewhere between 6 and 12 months during the infancy. These are data from adults showing that the brain responses are large for those stimuli on the phoneme map which coincide with the native language phonemes, and they are small for those which don't, so which are in between the native language phonemes. And this is the way to test the phoneme map. What we have found is that this phoneme map construction in prematurely born infants is actually not as fast as it should be. So in this experiment we were recording the existence of the phoneme map in full-term babies and also in prematurely born children. And we found that still at the age of 12 months, when the response to the non-native phoneme should have disappeared, and it has disappeared from the full-term babies, it hasn't actually disappeared from the prematurely born children. So this is something that is actually one piece of evidence showing that something is not right in the prematurely born baby's auditory development. And we are of course looking for ways to support this. So I'm going to skip that one. One of them is this kangaroo project that Ulrika is going to talk to you more about. And another one is then this project on the working pregnant mothers. So this project on the working pregnant mothers is at the Finnish Institute of Occupational Health. And here we are looking at if the pregnant mother working in noisy conditions could actually cause a problem for this learning system of the fetal brain. So if the fetus could actually, of course, being exposed to the noise in general, but also to be exposed to the co-occurrences in the noise, to the systematicity in the noise, and that could maybe be harming the auditory system. Unfortunately, I don't have any data to show to you yet, but finally I'm going to say a word about an optimal sound environment for the neonatal and prematurely born brain. So if you have silence, this means that there is no stimulation. This is stimulus deprivation. If you look at animal studies, what happens in stimulus deprivation is practically that there is less and slower connections from the ear towards the brain. This is not what we want. If you have random stimulation, this would be noise. The auditory system cannot make any model of that. So the model building system is not getting stimulation. What would be more optimal would be stimulation that has speech features, which has predictability, and which has relevance. And to put this into 2 words, it would be speech and singing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minna. I think we are so curious now to hear about the kangaroo project. So yes. My suggestion is that we do that, and then we take questions to both of you after that. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yes,
thank you so much.